super excited, Jake, for you to kind of help kind of debunk a lot of the maybe things people hear about metrics or they think they know about metrics and kind of guide us through it. So first off, Jake, you need no introduction, but go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, Jake Conway, owner, CEO of Custom Practice Analytics. I also work very closely and a coach with Dental Success Institute, Mark Costas, same with Summer, same with Ashley. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Ashley, of course, you need no introduction either. So co-host for the last whatever 2 years, Ashley is with us as well. Because actually, I love getting your viewpoint because you talk to, I mean, truly about as many doctors as we do. So it's nice to get your viewpoint too from a different perspective. So, I'm going to just kind of dive in because I have a sneaky feeling that once we get started, we're going to start going into all sorts of rabbit holes. But, when you first start working with a new client, Jake, and they come to you, what are you seeing are common struggles or opportunities that they're having? And is it different for new doctors versus experienced? And by new doctors, maybe like under 5 years versus experienced doctors, being over 5 years. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think there are some common themes, regardless of age, gender, time and place in your career. One of that is just clarity and awareness, both from a numbers perspective. So, feeling versus what's going on in the business versus truly what's happening from a number standpoint to drive my decision making. But also clarity on where they want to take the practice, where they want to go next. And a lot of times the conduit and what they feel like they should be doing to achieve said, short-term, long-term, medium-term goal. A lot of times their approach may not be super aligned with exactly what their vision is for themselves if they have one. So I'd say just clarity and awareness in general. Now, as far as stages in career, the baby doc versus the more seasoned doc, if you will, I'd say the focus is a little different, which it makes sense. I mean, a lot of times a younger doc is focused on new patients, production, collection, driving the business, focused on, just building your patient base, which again, right, especially in a startup, that's all relative. The more seasoned doc, if you will, their focus is more so on time, efficiency, a lot of times leveraging associates, not being so relied upon from a clinical standpoint. But a lot of times they want that, but again, going back to what's a common occurrence, they get a little squirmish are a little uneasy with that transition from clinician to that management CEO, which I have had a lot of conversations. I know you have too, both of you, Ashley and Summer, with that transition. So those are kind of the overarching themes that I see very commonly.
Okay, so new docs, kind of to reiterate, when they start working with you, a lot of times you're just helping them with like clarity of even where to go right now. Because it should change. Because in the beginning, you're just really in that hustle mode. You're really just trying to get patients in the chair, treat them as well as possible and maintain those patients. Older docs, sometimes when they come to you and say they're 10 years out, they may at this point really be needing an associate. They're thinking that's where they need to go. And you're really just helping kind of strategize, how do you bring in an associate? Because a lot of them are scared at that point, to have reliance on somebody else. Is that what I'm hearing you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it can be nuanced, but certainly that's a very common theme. Going back to the older doc, am I ready for an associate? What does that look like? So giving them confidence in a lot of ways, giving them permission in some ways to make that leap that they're feeling, using numbers to back up that decision. The younger doc, being super hyper focused on production and collection, again, to your point, as it should be, and I think that that's very common, but maybe directing them in areas to not outproduce the problem, if you will. Well, maybe there's a way you can increase your profitability by focusing on whether it's hygiene, supplies, looking at your spending habits. Again, just some of the low-hanging fruit stuff that's a little more, I hate to use the word elementary, but it's a little more just business 101 stuff.
Yeah, but they don't have that business in dental school.
Correct.
So
Correct. Which is why where I come in, So anyway, yeah, great questions.
Yeah. So, on that note, this is kind of the chunk that I'm assuming we're going to really dig into, which is, there's common things, because, I can say from experience that I came in, having practiced for years, and I still didn't know some of these really, some of the elementary numbers probably that I should have, but I definitely didn't know the numbers that you give on reports. So I'd love to kind of dive into, what do you see? And I'll kind of give you my feedback here after you answer, but what do you see as some of the common numbers that doctors either overlook, aren't looking at, or they see it, they just don't know what to do with it?
Good. Uh, I view this almost like a funnel system where you start at the top of the funnel and you work your way down. Uh, I think overhead in general can be a little fuzzy. Um, the way we view overhead and the impact it has on the practice, but also the factors playing into overhead, fixed versus variable, what's driving your overhead. Because whether it's variable, fixed, what again the highest contributing factors to your overhead, if it's high, um, that's gonna determine your decision making, whether it's plugging the holes in the bucket per se or adding more water. Now those are broad stroke terms and easy just to say, but in each of those silos comes a lot of work and intentionality, whether it's controlling your spending habits and variable costs of the practice, or focusing on growth and leveraging, expanding into the practice and again, adding more water. Um, Either way, it's a very time intensive thing from what I've seen. And there might be a blend of the two as well, where you have to plug some holes with adding more water, um, and focus on efficiencies that support that. So that's kind of the top of the funnel. As we move down, one big thing that I see happen pretty much every time, or as at least a huge opportunity in most cases, especially now, and that is hygiene. But it's not like what everyone thinks of as hygiene producing 3.3 times pay. That's very important as a profit center, but I call it more of the hygiene effect, like the impact hygiene truly has. Um, so as we're moving down this funnel of overhead analysis, let's look at how the hygiene department is impacting your overhead in general. Now, a lot of times I see hygiene salaries being pretty over budget, but that's not usually, or in most cases, even from their underperformance of 3.3 times pay. As we know, hygiene salaries are increasing. That's harder to come by these days, especially with PPO reimbursements and so forth. But that's not the only thing to look at. I look at things like hygiene production percentage of the office. A lot of times that can be too high. Then I look to like new patient flow, because a lot of times when you see hygiene production percentage being too high, some things are happening on the background. That's a symptom of something going on. So either there's too many recalls happening as a potential. There's maybe too many exams in general happening, whether it's a one or multiple doctor office. Maybe there's not enough new patient flow because hygiene is simply slammed. I know a lot of us experiencing that. But there's not enough new patient flow, so restorative is starting to dry up. So hygiene's booked, but doctors starting to dry up because as a result of that. So again, hygiene production percentage of the office, there are a lot of fingers that come off of that. So as you start to dig into that, you start to see some of these causes to this symptom. Um, Now, ideal scenarios for hygiene production percentages, if you're looking at if you want to look at your own practice from this webinar, uh, in a multi-doc office, 25 to 27% we like to see. In a single doc office, 30%, maybe a little lower. If you're over those thresholds, given the number of doctors, that's a red flag. That's something to pay attention to and start digging into some of these potential causes to that. So hygiene salaries usually is a direct result of some of these symptoms, or excuse me, causes and symptoms happening in the dental office. And it's not just the hygiene 3.3 times pay. Um, and that's a very common occurrence that I see. Um, yeah.
Hold on. One thing that I want to back up on, only because I'm not certain that everybody knows, like you kind of came up with the reason why you thought 3.3 times made sense. That kind of came from your brain because of things you looked at. Just, I want to make sure everybody understands why that's even, like a lot of times I just hear people saying that almost like it's just a thing. And I'm like, well, there's a reason why it's 3.3.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you for that. So I think before it was 3 times pay, which is still a good number, but ultimately 3.3 ensures that you're getting 70% of hygiene, net production, collection, one and the same, back to the practice after paying their hygiene salaries. So hygiene is a profit center. That's that metric. That's the formula. Now, the way I view it is hygiene department operates as like an associate. You know, it's much like an associate where you're paying them 30% of their production. And associates truly are profit centers where they help start driving down fixed costs along with the owning doctor. So that's kind of how I view the hygiene department and why 3.3 is the metric that I find most valuable in that case or in that scenario.
Okay. So I want to real quick though back up just because sometimes I want to make sure too. When you were talking about the top of the funnel, right? We were talking about fixed versus variable costs. One thing I know for myself, like your reports, or even if people are generating their own QuickBook reports, they're only going to be as accurate as the categorization that was, put into place. So, what do you see as some of the most commonly miscategorized areas when you're because your team really just pulls from whatever bookkeepers have categorized it, and I know for a fact a lot of doctors don't necessarily look at some of that stuff. So what do you see as some of the common things that might just get put in the wrong place if people are wanting to check now what bookkeepers are doing?
Yeah, very, very common. That, yeah, totally. So this is actually a twofold answer. To answer your question specifically, dental supplies, lab, very, because for instance, like we have lab slash specialty as our category. Things like Invisalign, if you do all on fours, even implants, uh, basically just bread and butter dentistry. We'll allocate that to lab slash specialty because we want to get a true account of what your true dental supply spend is. So there's a little misallocation there. I see a lot of times. Um, I would say hand pieces and small equipment that gets miscategorized in dental supplies. Um, I also see a lot of times, believe it or not, office expenses and advertising. There's a misallocation between those two. Either way can be detrimental because if your advertising is showing that you're over budget, whoa, we got to back off. When reality is some office expenses. Conversely, we're actually spending more than we're thinking, and we think we can allocate more to marketing, and the ROI isn't there, and so forth. So just making sure you're cleaning that up can bring a little bit more clarity. The second part of that answer that kind of plays into this is, and we've talked about this in the past, it's the accrual versus cash method in accounting. It's more of a blended accounting in dentistry. It's not truly accrual where you're accounting for accounts receivable like your production. It's on a cash basis on the revenue side, so you're only accounting for what's collected, but more so on the expenses side, we want to focus on accrual. And the easiest way I can describe that is when you get a dental supply bill and it comes in, you may not pay that bill for 30 days, but we record that bill as it comes in on an accrual basis versus when we actually pay that with cash. Now, your accountant, CPA, bookkeepers can easily set this up for you. But again, we want to record because we want to see what our true spending habit is, not because you'll see cash flow look sweet, sweet, sweet. And then, oh my God, we paid, 90 days worth of bills. And then we see our overhead spike in collection. So I mean, I'd say that's one thing to pay attention to as well.
Okay. Great. Well, because I think that's just important for everybody to recognize, like at the top of the funnel, like that's really where it all starts. So if we can't have accurate understanding of kind of the compass, if we don't have the compass pointing to north more or less. So thank you for that. So, going back into one of your biggest areas that you're saying that's maybe overlooked or maybe just not appreciated enough is really just that hygiene metric. And a lot of times what I see when I look through people's reports is, hygienists, they're not always at, 3.3 times their pay. They're at 3 times. Now, one thing that I love about your report, something I appreciate is I actually can look at if they've been a client of yours for the last few years, I can see the trends. Are they trending up? Are they trending down? So at least I can tell like, hey, your hygienists were doing it. You raised your fees and now they're not. Just something to be looking at. So that's one thing I love is being able to see the trend. But sometimes I see, hygienists are trending up, but they're still not quite there at 3.3. And doctors are really getting, frustrated as to what can I do? How can I, really push them? And I always say, like, that number is just a number. There's so many directions as to why potentially they're not at 3.3 times their pay. And, I say all the time, some of it's PPO, sometimes it's the procedure mix of the day, sometimes it's they have unfilled time units, same day cancellations. All of those variables are the very first thing I'd look at before I'd look at my hygienist is underproducing. Because sometimes we go right to my hygienist isn't doing enough. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's actually other factors before they even get to that point. What do you see with that?
Absolutely. A lot of factors. I would say before you, because when we talk about production in general, hitting our production goals as an office, whether it's monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever, those numbers are a direct result and a byproduct of the efficiency in the office, hitting what we call these KPIs. The KPIs are a direct result of the patient care education, all these things you guys do well as clinicians and as providers. So with that in mind, before we start, like you said, thinking that we have inadequate hygienist or what have you, I would first start ensuring that our KPIs are being met. We're giving ourselves the best chance to hit this production versus pay as a result of this. What I mean by that is perio percentages. Are those at 40 to 45%? Are we offering fluoride and getting acceptances 80 to 85%? Are you doing laser if you believe in that? The ozone stuff, all the cool stuff that we're doing in hygiene these days. So I would ensure that your KPIs are being met first. If that's being hit and we're doing everything we can there, and we're still not the 3.3 times pay, I can feel good about that. Because now okay, we're doing everything we can. Then you start looking at factors like what's our open rate or no-show rate? Is there a chance we can tighten that up through our confirmation systems? Or are people simply just last minute no-showing cancellation? There's nothing you can do about that. So it's more of like control what you can, be as efficient as you can. At the end of the day, if you look up and you're still not quite there, you can accept that. I would say look to other factors like we talked about just a second ago. What's the hygiene production percentage of the office? How many exams are you doing as the doctor? What's your treatment acceptance as the doctor? What's your exam mix like? Are you doing a crap ton of these recalls that become the doctor killer? The periodic exam ultimately becomes the doctor killer. And all you dentists out there, I think you can attest to that, especially you crazies running 3 columns of hygiene, which that's just insanity. But that becomes a doctor killer. So then you look at that mix, then you look at new patient flow. Is there enough comps going on to support not only throttling your recalls, but also lifeblood of the practice? Essentially, like we talked about, your restorative dries up without enough new patients. It's not just new patients, new patients, new patients. It's new patients, but new patients with a purpose, right? And then of course the emergency to consider. So there's the total exams, but the mix of exams that the doctor is doing as well. So all of that plays into account. And then you look at the hygiene schedule. Is it booked out for 4, 5, 6, 7 months? And is it just a ton of recall patients, right? So I've seen a lot of that. Do we need to expand? Do we need to bring on more hygiene to support this? Does that require an additional doctor? So there's a lot of decisions that stem from this little opportunity in the practice that we just kind of went through. But again, that kind of goes into many different fingers. Is it time for that, going from 4 to 8 operatories, for instance? I know big decisions that can come out of this.
Yeah. Well, and I think like to really kind of put our finger on it, I think really analyzing what's going on in the hygiene schedule and starting to see the trends sooner than later can be so helpful. Because I think most doctors that I talk to are reacting way too late. Because of course, right, they're just fearful, I think, of having to expand or potentially getting more hygienists or cutting PPOs or, something. But I think starting to really look at that schedule, look at some of these hygiene numbers, which, if you use Jake's reports, the nice thing is everything's right there. But if you start seeing those warning lights, it's just a warning light. It doesn't mean your hygienist is necessarily doing something bad or wrong. It just means it's a warning light to start to say, wait a minute, something's trending differently. Same with, to kind of review some of the numbers, looking at what percentage of the whole practice are they contributing. If it starts to get too high, a lot of times I see doctors and they're like, my hygienists are producing 43%. And I'm like, oh no. Like,
yeah, it's not
that's
good.
that's not good. And I'm like, that means obviously either you're doing too many exams or you yourself aren't able to produce enough to actually maintain numbers. So I think it is important, and hygiene's an area that there's so many cool indicators that can indicate really great things coming, but if we don't see them, we can just find ourselves kind of caught up in a bind of way too many exams or not enough new patient flows or not enough places for new patients. Um, and that, go ahead. I can see you. Go ahead.
Oh, I have a question for you actually, because I'm interested in on from your perspective, because I know you talked a lot of dentists and obviously you're a dentist yourself. When it comes to the hygiene underperformance, do you think that that comes more from scheduling and efficiency, or hygienist and like the efficiency with the patient in the chair, or is it a mixed bag?
Are you asking Ashley or me or both of us?
Both of you, both of you.
Sure. Ash.
No, 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 you go. You're the one with the practice.
So you're asking, say that again. So when is it usually unfilled time type units? What do you, forgive me, say that again.
So is it more of like an efficiency with scheduling itself? Like,
Mhm.
because if you're diagnosing peri but there's a room on the schedule, that's a problem, right?
Right.
So do you think that again, is it more so that it's a scheduling efficiency or lack thereof, or is it more so that the hygienist efficiency with the patient, or is it a mixed bag?
I think it's a mixed bag. And I would say like if you know what you're hiring, it's definitely the former, not the latter. It's
Mhm.
if you're hiring somebody who maybe shows the signs of not wanting to be a growth oriented, impact driven hygienist, that's when I see, you know, you're probably going to get somebody who's just not necessarily time efficient. They're the ones who usually, hygienist wise, can't, necessarily fit in laser or something like that.
Okay.
Well, I want to dive in kind of to, hygiene is a huge indicator. We just kind of discussed so many metrics that doctors can start looking at, just in that one department. But one thing I want to kind of key in on, because we alluded to it in the beginning, is when to bring on an associate. Well, so much of that is tied to hygiene, hygiene and hygiene exams. And so tell me, when you're talking to doctors, and they could be 2 years out and this could happen, they could be 6 months out. And I've seen this happen where they need
Oh yeah.
associates. So what do you coach them through? What are some of the key metrics you have them look at?
It's actually a pretty, I mean, simple enough equation. And again, like you said, it stems from hygiene. If you're, for instance, if you're a single doctor office with 2 columns of hygiene, and hygiene is starting to be booked out 3, 4 weeks at 100% of capacity, you're starting to build demand on the hygiene time, where you demand is there, so it's qualified for a third column of hygiene. You need a second doctor for that. Then you have to analyze, do I have enough space for that? If you're a 5-op practice, chances are that's not going to work out. Is there room to physically grow the practice to allow this to unfold? So starting with hygiene, that's the first indication. Now, I will say sometimes that can be a little nuanced. What I mean by that is it may just be a ton of volume. So looking at going back to your exam, like flow and the exam type, mix of exams, because you could have a ton of recalls and not a lot of new patients, and not necessarily because you don't have demand, mainly it's because you don't have a lot of new patients for whatever reason. So you may need to consider allowing for a round of block scheduling to come into play to see if there's true demand on the schedule from a new patient flow standpoint. Again, normalizing some of these recalls, seeing what happens with the production as a result of that. So it's a little nuanced, but generally speaking, that's what I start with is hygiene. Now, that same rule of thumb applies to, let's say you're a 3-doctor office with 5 columns of hygiene. And I mean, I've seen the scenario where you're booked out literally wall to wall with all kinds of patient types, new patients through the roof, and you're booked out for 6 months. You could probably add 2 more hygienists in that scenario. Well, in that case, that's either 1 or even 2 more doctors. So playing that whole ratio of hygiene to doctors is really what comes into play next. But again, it does start with hygiene demand and the exam, healthy exam counts, the mixed bag of exams coming in per month, and really just building massive awareness of what's happened to that point.
And one thing when I'm talking to doctors, I tell them there's such easy reports right on Open Dental. I don't know Dentrix as well as I used to, but you can pull reports for what is the mix of exams in your office. So if you're looking and you're doing 250 exams and the bulk of those are periodics, you're running around a lot, but you might not be actually doing a ton of dentistry from that. So really looking at new patient limited, and I know you and I have had heated discussions about total exam count and
That was a
but
miscommunication.
because I'm like, it's total exams. Like if a doctor looks at, all the exams that they do per month, comp, periodic, limited, really look at what the mix is. And then what I tell doctors is pull what that is. How much treatment are you treatment planning per each of those kind of exams? So if you look at your limiteds, likely they're going to be higher than 1,000, depending on your skill set. If you do endo extractions, things like that, implants, they're probably going to be higher. Same with comps. They're likely going to be ultimately higher. Periodics, likely you're going to see those are going to be a lower dollar per exam. And so when you look at that mix, that also helps you determine, is it time for an associate? Also, are we pinching off the new patient flow because we just don't have enough room? So if we actually just open up some capacity, whether it be with another hygienist or what have you, or even bring a doctor in to be able to do, comps through their schedule, sometimes we can actually find that we may have only been getting 40 new patients a month, but really what calls we were getting were actually more like 60, 70 new patients a month. Yes. So I think that, a lot of times when we're seeing, to kind of back it up, we're seeing the warning lights in hygiene, we're seeing them booked out, we're seeing tons of recall appointments, we're looking at the numbers and the doctor can't produce because they're doing a ton of exams. These are all warning lights that, hey, like we need to start coming up with some ideas of what to do. But anything else on that?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to highlight with some things to avoid that I see a common, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but it's a little preemptive. Let's say you're going from, let's say, 2 columns to 3 columns of hygiene. We're gearing up for an associate, and all those metrics check out, and we're ready for that. A lot of times, I'll see as doctors, they'll say, "Well, I'm going to start hitting marketing before I do this." The danger with that is we trick ourselves into thinking that marketing is working. I would say if you're in that scenario, let's say you're either a 1, 2 doctor office, whatever, if you're planning to expand and you're at capacity, make that expansion first. Make sure that you're intentional with the new patient blocking and allowing new patients to come in. See what happens as a result of that, and then decide, okay, is it time to really start hitting the marketing heavy? Because again, if we just open up capacity, a lot of times the new patients will be there because they're calling, they're on a wait list or whatever the case may be. We trick ourselves into thinking that, well, the marketing's working, but in reality, the patients are there either way. So just one thing I just see as a common occurrence.
Yeah, I agree. Because a lot of times I tell people, especially, and I know this sounds nuts, but even with COVID, there's still a lot of people who never came back or are just now trying to get back. And so I always let people know, I'm like, oh my gosh, before you spend a ton on marketing, look at your attrition lists. See if you can actually reactivate the patients you've already paid for to actually fill your hygiene schedule. And by the way, those are like comp exams all over again. So you've already paid for that, and they're going to be like comp exams yet again. So I think there's a lot of wisdom with that too, that I think everybody, and I think it's just as, it's a natural reaction that doctors are fearful, I think a lot of times, when it comes to expanding and paying for it and bringing on more hygienists. I think it's just a natural reaction of like turn up the marketing. And a lot of times it's funny, if you would check your, Mango or any of your VoIP systems, you're going to find there was a ton of missed calls. There was a ton of patients that probably couldn't get in. And there's a pretty decent attrition list for a lot of practices. So you may just have it once you open up the capacity. Now, real quick, for people who don't know, I want to discuss, this is a broad window here, but number of exams per doctor. I know you always give people total exam count wise, what do you tell doctors starts to become kind of that window where people have a hard time producing enough based on the number of exams?
Sure. Like you said, it's a little nuanced based on the doctor. I've seen, you machines out there can it'd be a little higher, that threshold, and obviously some of the younger docs a little lower. But generally speaking, total exam counts, if you're at that 180 to 185 range, that starts that conversation most of the time. Again, it could be a little lower, it could be a little higher. The mix of exams in that, now this is where it depends on the amount of exams and the type of exam. For instance, if you're doing over 125, 130 periodics per month, that's troublesome. On top of that, if you're doing more than 35, 40 new patient exams on top of that, that becomes troublesome. And then you have, of course, your recalls, I mean, your emergencies to consider as well. So it's the mix of exams as well. Now, I will say, more nuanced, if you're doing 185, 190 exams per month, but you're doing less than 100 periodics and more new patients and a bit more emergency dentistry, you could probably hang out there for a little longer, because again, that's a nice healthy mix. But what I see a lot of times with the former, with too many periodics, you'll start to see, of course, restorative dry up, but then you have this seesaw effect in production, where 1 month it's high, then it drops. 1 month it's high, then it drops, and eventually it'll flatline and then slowly just die at the vine because restored and everything else. I mean, I think that makes sense. But the other side of that, if you have a healthy mix of new patients, you're still kind of redlining, but it's a nice healthy patient flow, that you can hang out there for a little while, but that's still cause for looking at expansion and growing into this next phase of the practice.
Well, and one thing that I talk to doctors about, like, this is why I'm such a big fan of, like, look at what the dollar per exam actually is equating to. Because sometimes I think it's like people like wear it as a badge of honor that they're like, I can do 250 exams and keep my production. I'm like, or you could do less exams, be more, truly like present during them, and actually have just a higher dollar per exam, do less, and be able to bring in help. I was just talking to a doctor, last week, and she does, I kid you not, I had her run the numbers, and then I was so surprised. I literally was like, I better go look again and double check it. She literally, per treatment plan, or per exam, excuse me, was over 5,000 per exam. I know.
What is she doing? Implants, like
everything. Exactly. And like, but point more interesting, because I literally couldn't believe it. She only needed about 100 exams per month. Her associate doctor, same thing, and was treatment planning about 2,300. So, by the way, everybody's probably thinking, well, they must be fee for service. She actually did take us, a few of the higher level PPOs. It was more so her philosophy of care was super comprehensive, so she could do less. So I tell doctors, like, there's multiple ways to do this. That's why that exam count is so broad. But you have to think about that. So if you're starting to see the trends, you're using Jake's reports, you're starting to see the hygiene numbers, your production is starting to flatline, you're one of those doctors who does do some of the more comprehensive things, bring in a doctor then as an associate. That's part of who you would bring in, as somebody who can do some of that general dentistry to be able to give you more room and availability to do that higher value stuff, because you're going to need way less exams. I just noticed that, this doctor was even telling me that when she brought in a third doctor, all the third doctor could see was there's not enough exams. What she didn't understand was it feels like not enough exams, but she was actually, that third doctor was also treatment planning over 2,300 an exam, just based on how they do things there. And I joked with her, I said, based on her number of exams, and at 2,300, she treatment planned over $150,000 of dentistry. But all that associate saw was, I'm not doing enough exams. So sometimes doctors, we just have to help link things together, because people think to themselves, busy equals productive. Yeah. If I don't have enough exams, I won't be productive. And yes, that's true, but I'm always like, but actually check the facts to ensure that every exam we're doing is mattering. Is that a word? Mattering? It matters. So I don't know. I just started.
That's fine. We made it up.
But I just think that's such an interesting concept that I think so much with associates, they freak out when, like I said, the volume doesn't feel quite as high, but I'm like, it's actually just a better opportunity to be really mindful and comprehensive with your exams. So
absolutely. And if you're both sides, whether it's for yourself or for an associate in that situation or that scenario, start looking at the case acceptance rates a patient saying yes, is it healthy between 70 to 80%, depending on what type of dentistry you do. But then start looking at the dollar amount of presented versus what's accepted. A lot of times that will be much higher because of you're spending more time. There's more vitality in general. It's not Thursday at 4. Mark Costas likes to use this analogy where it's Thursday 4, new patient comes in, you're burnt from the week, you're hoping nothing's in the mouth because you're just like, I just want to get out of here. It's that type of feeling that I know a lot of dentists out there feel. So yeah, and then you look at average dollar amount, average dollar amount treatment plan and so forth. But yeah, start looking at the numbers behind the numbers, and then that way you can, like you said, kind of bridge some of the feeling versus what's reality, which numbers can do for us all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's such a wonderful way to actually bring an associate in, is really helping them to understand those numbers is going to make them so much more successful, and actually work truly smarter and not just harder, thinking that that's the way it should be. Well, and on that note,
By the way, have we squashed the whole emergent or exams per month thing? Is that in the past now?
I think I'm done with that one. I just really wanted to make sure I'm like, I'm in the trenches. I know what it feels like.
What do you know? You're just a numbers guy. You're not a dentist, which is true. All valid points.
But what are other warning signs? When you're talking to dentists and you're looking through their reports, what are things that you look at that perhaps other doctors aren't, or they're glossing over? Can you think of any others besides hygiene, number of exams, all the warning lights within hygiene?
I mean, again, the contributing factors to overhead, but I also would say, especially as of late, you mentioned this earlier, trends in the practice, because I see a lot that's happening now is a massive recency bias, whether it's good or bad. From like October through even heading into January, it was a mess. People were sick. The schedule was falling apart. It was just a weird 3 or 4 months. I qualify 3 months as a trend. 4 months, it's kind of what's becoming normal. After 6 months, it's pretty much the identity of the practice. But be mindful of that. So I would say analyzing the trends in the practice, what's happened thus far, and projecting into the future is a little bit of forecasting. And I say that comes down to the fixed cost of the practice, your spending, whether it's supplies, lab, because a lot of times low-hanging fruit, you may have solved it a year ago, but it creeps back, where all of a sudden your reps are charging you $30 again when it was 20 before, or maybe you got somebody new on a new DA who change up your ordering process, where the case may be. So I'd say trend analysis, which kind of goes into more of like auditing as well, auditing some of your processes. Yeah, I would say that's probably a big one.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been really noticing is collection rates. People's collections are just slowly ticking down. And practices that were always at, 98, 99, those slowly start to see 97, 95. And it's almost like it just doesn't even get seen because it's still so close. But I've been warning doctors that a lot of times, some of the best practices I've seen, it's starting to tick down below 95, 92. And the thing that I'm seeing trend-wise is insurance companies are getting more and more difficult to work with. And so I think it's super important that doctors, I keep recommending this. If you haven't looked at your AR, patient AR, insurance AR, take them separately and look what's in them. Because a lot of times with patient AR, if you do any kind of payment plans, one trend I'm seeing is like people's credit cards are getting canceled or closed. And so if they're on an auto pay, a lot of times they're getting declined and nobody's following up. Because I think people's financial stuff right now is getting a little bit tougher. And that's on the patient AR side, or people aren't sending out maybe, even just a text to pay link. Sometimes they're still sending out paper statements and they're not able to get, patient payments quickly. So that's one that I'm seeing on the patient AR side. On the insurance AR side, I'm really seeing difficulty with insurance companies. Lots of new narratives being needed. Guidelines for crown processing has been really tough. A lot of kickbacks. people are not getting crowds covered like they used to. And so I think we have to really kind of rethink what narratives we're sending, what IO photos. I know in our practice, we completely changed what the narratives look like for a crown prep so that our insurance people can pull the information and try to get a clean claim sent the first time. So that's one that I'm seeing is collections AR and patient AR. That started to decline as a trend.
Yeah, I totally. And as of late, with the production that was kind of up and down during the last 4 or 5 months, AR started to dry up, and now we're starting to. January was a pretty good month for most offices I'm seeing, and then February out of the gates pretty good as well. So that's one thing to be mindful of. On top of that, just again being super aware of what's normal for your business and analyzing trends, so is it that what you just mentioned, or is it just a moment in time where AR is kind of catching up and we had some big months in relation. I will say, kind of big picture, kind of going back to what you one of your questions, Summer. Uh, in general, you mentioned this a few times, like these warning lights. That's something that I one of my frameworks that I use with the people I work with is whether it's hygiene, supplies, collection percentages, whatever these little lights or the indicators are telling you, these are symptoms of something going on in the practice. It's up to you and your team and all that with that awareness, digging into the potential causes to those symptoms. If it's supplies, as you know, Summer, and you, Ashley, you've been in the dental office for many years, that can mean a plethora of things: inventory control, who we're ordering from, how we're ordering, the cadence, so on and so forth. Are we establishing a budget? Which I see a lot of times people don't even use that as some of our, we didn't even touch that, which that could be a whole concept in itself. But again, the potential cause of these symptoms, and then offering up solutions to, it's that Eastern versus Western medicine, right? So you fix the root cause versus just prescribing Xanax and also the crap that may be useful sometimes, but it is not the long-term fix.
Yeah. Ash, what do you have anything on any of this?
Well, first of all, I want to apologize for monopolizing the conversation. I just wouldn't shut up this entire time.
We noticed.
Oh, that confidence with that cool new hair.
Yeah. So no, I think the biggest thing that just kind of ties this all together, and you guys have touched on in all of these categories, is the I feel like I need to hire someone else. I feel like I'm not doing enough exams. I feel like doesn't make sense. Check the numbers. If it's a feeling, it could be a symptom of something, but let's look at the data. Let's look at what's actually happening. Let's look at the root cause, and follow the breadcrumb trail before we just dive into, I feel like I need to hire a new associate. I feel like whatever it may be, like as Addison Killeen, it is by the numbers. Let's take a look at the numbers. Let's make data driven decisions and not feelings based decisions. That's
Absolutely.
my big take.
Ashley, I love that so much. Funny one that I hear, I'm sure you've heard this too, Summer, and I know you have too, Ashley. I feel like I need a partner. Whoa. No, maybe, but let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, we won't even touch that one quite yet, but I think there's just so many warning lights that can be going off. And what I see often is, I think doctors will often tell me, I don't have time to look at this stuff. And that's where, like not to plug Jake, but I'm like, here's the great thing is something like CPA can actually get you the numbers that matter to you right in your email inbox. And, Jake can actually tell you, here's the story of what's going on. And so it's like, you don't have to sit in the dark anymore. And, I was embarrassed. I remember one of my first calls with Jake, I literally flat out just said, Jake, I know I've been a dentist this long, but I am super embarrassed because I actually don't even know what these numbers really are. But that was the greatest gift because once I understood, everything was able to change for me. And so I always invite doctors, whether you're newer or younger, like reach out and ask for help. Because the first thing is just seeing the numbers. We can teach you kind of what to do with those. And then once you know, you'll always know. So you'll always from there on out be making, better data, based decisions. So Jake, if people do want to reach out to you, they want to get a hold of you, how do they do so?
I mean, and thank you. I do appreciate the plug. Um, you can reach out to me on DSN. This is DSN land. You can, I mean, you can message me on there. What I'll do is I'll send you just a link to schedule a discovery call, and I'll be happy to see if we're a good fit for you.
Awesome.
And to that point, if you're on this call and you're not a DSN member, it's time to join DSN.
Yeah, that's step
And
one.
I
Step
didn't even
one.
know that can happen.
Yeah, yep, we've opened this up to the public now. You're going far and wide.
Cool.
Whoa.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's a 45-day free trial. Why would you not?
Well, so if for those that are not in DSN, then you can go to customerpracticeanalytics.com and schedule a call there.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, I mean, there's honestly, I feel like we could have part 2 and 3 because I think there's just so many awesome numbers. But what we really touched on is the beginning of the funnel, like really understanding what's going into what category, ensuring that the categories are solid. You know what's going into the categories. If not, meet with your bookkeeper to get an idea of what should be there. We really discussed hygienists, and the 3.3 times their pay, really looking at some of the warning signs when they're getting booked out too far with a whole bunch of recall. Another warning sign. If we're getting too many exams for one doctor per month, looking at distilling down what are the different types of exams that are being done per month, what's being treatment planned per exam, and is it getting to the point where the doctor can't do their own production because they're up doing exams all the time. We kind of discussed when associates are a good idea. And ideally, we want to be thinking about this before we're at the red light, we're bursting at the seams and everybody's ready to, get real frustrated with each other. So hopefully we can start to see some of these warning signs sooner. If you don't have any of this information or you don't know what to do, reach out to Jake and ask for his help.
Okay, wait, we have a question real quick that popped up in because we do go live inside of DSN, but then we have people who join us live from all over the place. And so this question is, what tip would you give for offices who are short-staffed but still have to schedule to production?
Short, I would say, are you short-staffed in the back, front, hygiene, depending on what department that is. Whoever that is, can they add more context to that?
It was a text question, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get
Okay.
it. We'll have her tag you guys in the comments instead of DSN and answer.
Yeah.
Let's say
in the back. Says in the back.
Back office. Okay, great. Summer could probably talk to this more so from a dental perspective, but by the numbers and from what I've seen success with, depending on how many doctors you have, I mean, it comes down to, this sounds archaic, but like running isolites, dry shields, that type of thing, if you have the ability to do so. And it comes down to effective scheduling and utilizing assistance where you can. You may have to change how you're scheduling to some degree. And that scheduling to goal may need to adjust as well, unfortunately. That's my broad stroke answer. I'm sure, Summer, you probably have more say on
Well,
that.
and to some degree, I mean, if you're short-staffed, overhead should be going down to some degree.
Well,
I mean, truly, like I would actually really be looking at the numbers to figure out, like, if I am short-staffed, because I can tell you from experience, I have been in those exact shoes. If it is the DA, if that's what you said, I mean, I kid everybody not. Ash, I think you know this. We had 4 doctors, and I kid you not, we had 2 assistants for a chunk of time. And because I live in the Vail Valley, and it's just a hard place to staff. And what we really did do is exactly what Jake did, is we block scheduled. We tried to have as long of appointments as we possibly could to fit as much treatment in. We always put in an isolite, and the doctor literally knew exactly when they didn't need the assistant, so the assistant could move on. And they would do sterile, and they'd set the next room up. We utilized our hygienist, and we even pulled from the front once in a while a little bit. But to some point, like I would reanalyze my numbers to really ensure with the lower, payroll, what does it actually look like? Because often I'm like, I knew my goals actually changed. We didn't have to produce quite as much to still feel comfortable. And not only that, but I also was okay with, just to give perspective, like sometimes people get real used to being under 55% overhead. Well, during those types of times, you might be having to compensate some of the, people a little bit better to be picking up so much extra slack, and your overhead might be a little bit wonky, but keep it in perspective because, for me, it was morale and culture, try to keep that up during that time, make the best of what was possible with, who I had. Because I knew it was going to be a short window of time. So I didn't want to react in a way that was going to be detrimental to the culture, which is a long-term problem. So
also, if you're running new pay in the summer, I mean, obviously that's all spot on. Well, if you're running new patients to the doctor side, you may consider flipping that to hygiene, less assistant utilization. I'm not sure what's happening there, but just something to be mindful of as well.
yeah, it's not easy. And I can truly speak from experience. These two both know I was short staffed for 3 years. Like we just now have become back to. So I very much feel everybody's pain with that for sure. Well, thank you guys. Always good to get to see you both. And thank you, Jake, for taking your time on an afternoon doing this with us.
Thank you. That was actually really, really fun. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.
We're super fun. Spread the word. Ash and I are so fun.
Lady leaders.
Why did he sound so shocked about it?
What'd you say?
I said, why does he have to sound so shocked about it? That was actually really fun.
Oh, well, because it's late in the day and I've already had my
no, I got you.
I've had my exam counts, but no, it's been great. And now with it broadcast to the world, everyone should see you guys.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I know we're not just for ladies. So
not lady leaders and not just for ladies.
No. Metro
awesome.
men.
That's right. Well, thank you for your time, Jake. Thanks, Ash, for hanging out with us, talking about numbers. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys.
As well, next month we have Dr. Kelly Dove joining us. So we're excited to have our black belt coach, Dr. Kelly Dove. And yes, we will see you all next month.
Awesome. Have a great day, guys. Bye.